The Korean CEO ex-wife stayed quiet in divorce court until the judge asked one unexpected question. They thought her silence was submission. They thought her calm was weakness. For 3 days, Min-ji Park sat in that sterile Seoul courtroom, watching her CEO ex-husband and his team of lawyers tear apart her character with calculated precision. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just watched. Everyone in the gallery, the press, even her own counsel, thought it was over. But they didn't know that Min-ji wasn't silent because she was afraid. She was silent because she was waiting. Waiting for one specific question that would bring an entire empire crashing down. When Judge Kim finally asked it, the answer didn't just end a marriage. It destroyed a legacy. You won't believe what she was holding back. If you're watching this right now, take a second to hit that like button and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of justice and redemption. The gleaming doors of courtroom 12 in the Seoul family court felt impossibly heavy with the weight of inevitable defeat. The air conditioner hummed monotonously, vibrating against the tension filling the room. Jae-sung Kim adjusted his hand-tailored Brioni suit jacket, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. He didn't look like a man fighting for his assets. He looked like a man who had already secured his victory and was simply waiting for it to be formalized. At 38, Jae-sung was South Korea's golden child, heir to the Kim family legacy and founder of next-gen technologies, whose innovations had transformed the country's AI landscape. His handshake was rumored to be worth billions. The man who had once been featured on the cover of Forbes Asia as the future of Korean innovation sat there with 5 attorneys, 5, while his ex-wife had just 1. Sitting beside him was Hyejin, his 24-year-old girlfriend, a social media influencer with 10 million followers and a practiced, innocent smile. She wore a modest beige dress that screamed, appropriate future wife, while her fingers nervously twisted the diamond bracelet he'd given her last month. In the gallery behind them sat board members, investors, and family connections, the entire power structure of Korea's tech elite. On the other side sat Min-ji. She wore a simple gray hanbok-inspired dress, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing to distract from the deep, bone-weary exhaustion etched into her face. But there was something else there too, something that made Jae-sung shift uncomfortably whenever their eyes met. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even anger. It was patience. The kind of patience that moves mountains grain by grain. For 3 days, Min-ji had watched as witness after witness, household staff, company executives, even former friends, testified to her supposed inadequacies. They called her cold, distracted, too focused on her work to be a proper wife. They suggested her traditional upbringing made her incapable of understanding her husband's visionary business mind. They implied she'd married for status, for the Kim family name. And throughout it all, she remained silent. She didn't object. She didn't cry. She simply watched and waited, her hands folded neatly in her lap, occasionally making notes on a small pad with handwriting so meticulous it looked like art. She hasn't said a word, Hyejin whispered to her friend, loud enough for the gallery to hear. It's practically an admission of guilt. But Min-ji wasn't broken. She was counting. 9 years earlier, Jae-sung Kim had been at a crossroads. Born into privilege as the son of a shipping magnate, he'd been desperate to prove himself on his own terms. His fledgling AI startup operating out of a converted warehouse in Seoul's Gangnam district was running on fumes. The promise of his adaptive learning algorithm had attracted initial investor interest, but without a working prototype, the money was running out fast. The Seoul National University alumni dinner wasn't his scene. He'd barely maintained passing grades there, skating by on his family name while focusing on networking rather than studies. But venture capitalists loved these events, and Jae-sung needed capital desperately. What he found instead was Min-ji. She wasn't like the other women who gravitated toward him, drawn by the Kim name and the promise of wealth. Min-ji Park was quiet, brilliant, with eyes that saw through pretense. The daughter of a mathematics professor and a classical musician, she'd graduated at the top of her class with dual degrees in computer science and applied mathematics. When Jae-sung tried to impress her with technical jargon, she gently corrected his terminology, not to embarrass him but because precision mattered to her. What Jae-sung didn't know then, what he would never fully comprehend, was that Minji had already developed an elegant solution to the exact computational problem his company was struggling with. Her senior thesis on self-learning algorithms had been published in international journals, though under her academic ID number rather than her name, a choice she made to avoid unwanted attention. For Minji, the attraction to Jae-sung wasn't his name or his ambition. It was his vision for how AI could transform healthcare, education, and access to information. She believed in that vision, even if she quickly realized he lacked the technical skills to achieve it. Their whirlwind romance shocked Seoul society. The brilliant, quiet daughter of academics and the charismatic chaebol heir seemed an unlikely match. Her parents worried. They knew the Kim family reputation. But Minji saw something in Jae-sung that others missed, not who he was, but who he could be if guided by the right moral compass. 3 months after they met, Minji showed Jae-sung her algorithm, the elegance of her code, the intuitive leaps her mathematical mind had made. It was beyond anything his team had developed. With her solution, NextGen's prototype would work. More than work, it would revolutionize the field. "This is brilliant," he told her, eyes wide with genuine admiration. "You're brilliant. We could do something important with this," she replied softly. "Something that helps people." 6 months later, they were married in a lavish ceremony that made the front page of every newspaper in Korea. Minji's parents sat uncomfortably among Korea's elite. Her father in his one good suit, her mother wearing the pearl earrings she'd saved years to buy. As Minji walked down the aisle, her grandmother whispered, "Remember, child, in silence there is strength. The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that breaks." She couldn't have known how prophetic those words would become. For the first 2 years, their partnership thrived. Minji's algorithm became the foundation of NextGen's flagship product, an AI learning system that adapted to individual users with unprecedented accuracy. The technology transformed education in Korea, allowing students from rural areas to receive personalized instruction that previously only the wealthiest could afford. Behind closed doors, it was Minji who refined the code, who solved the implementation problems, who envisioned the applications. But in public, it was Jae-sung who took the stage, who accepted the awards, who gave the TED Talks and magazine interviews. Minji didn't mind. Not at first. She had been raised to value contribution over credit, results over recognition. But as NextGen grew exponentially, as Jae-sung's star rose and the company expanded globally, something began to change. The first time he took sole credit for her work was at the Asian Technology Summit in Singapore. She watched from the audience as he described his breakthrough in algorithm design, using her exact words from their late-night conversations but never once mentioning her name. That night in their hotel suite, she asked him why. "It's business, Minji," he said dismissively. "Investors don't want to back a company where the founder's wife is the brains. It undermines confidence. Besides, we're a team. What's mine is yours." She accepted this explanation because she wanted to believe him, because she had been raised to support her husband, to trust his judgment in business matters, because her grandmother had taught her that patience was power. But she also began to document everything. Each line of code, each development milestone, each breakthrough, all meticulously archived, time-stamped, and secured in multiple locations. Not out of distrust, she told herself, but out of proper scientific procedure. As NextGen Technologies grew from promising startup to dominant industry force, Minji watched Jae-sung transform as well. The passionate innovator with dreams of changing the world became obsessed with stock prices, luxury acquisitions, and his position in Korean business rankings. The man who had once worked 18-hour days alongside his engineers now spent his time at exclusive clubs with potential investors and government officials. The partnership that had defined their early marriage fractured, one small betrayal at a time. "I need you at this dinner tonight," he would say. "The Minister of Technology will be there." "I'm finalizing the new learning module," she would respond. "It needs to be completed by morning. Have the team finish it. You're my wife. Your place is by my side, making me look good." The respect in his voice had vanished, replaced by expectation, then demand, then contempt when she failed to comply. 4 years into their marriage, NextGen went public. The company valuation reached $20 billion. Jae-sung became the youngest billionaire in Korean history. In every interview, he positioned himself as a self-made visionary who had built the company through sheer brilliance and determination. Minji's name appeared nowhere in the company prospectus. Her role was officially listed as advisor to the CEO. That same month, she discovered she was pregnant. The pregnancy should have brought them closer. Instead, it widened the gulf. Jae-sung was consumed with a massive expansion into the Chinese market, a move Minji cautioned against, warning of intellectual property risks and regulatory complexities. He dismissed her concerns as fear, as typical female risk aversion. When complications arose in her 7th month, doctors ordered bed rest. Jae-sung was in Beijing, negotiating contracts. He didn't come home. The future of the company is at stake, he told her over the phone. Millions of dollars on the line. I can't leave now. Minji endured the fear alone. Her mother moved into their Gangnam penthouse to care for her, while Jae-sung sent impersonal daily bouquets with cards signed by his assistant. When she lost the baby, he sent a larger bouquet. He returned 3 days later, not to comfort her but to prepare for a press conference announcing the Chinese partnership. He entered her bedroom, where she lay recovering, and asked if she would be presentable for the cameras by the following week. The narrative works in our favor, he explained, checking his watch. The devoted CEO who expanded the company while supporting his wife through tragedy. People love a human touch to business stories. Something broke inside Minji that day. Not loudly, not obviously, but fundamentally. The fracture ran through every assumption she had made about their marriage, their partnership, their future. But still, she remained silent. She archived her pain alongside her code, documenting it with the same precision. And she continued working, pouring her grief into the algorithm, making it better, faster, more intuitive. The work became her sanctuary, the one place where truth still mattered. 6 years into their marriage, NextGen Technologies had offices in 12 countries. Jae-sung was rarely home, traveling constantly for business and pleasure, though the distinction had blurred beyond recognition. Minji ran the research division, leading a team of brilliant engineers who respected her mind but wondered why she wasn't the CEO. She first noticed the financial irregularities while preparing the division's quarterly budget report. Small discrepancies at first: research funds allocated but never received, development resources promised but diverted elsewhere. Following the money trail led her to offshore accounts, to shell companies with meaningless names, to systematic theft of investor funds. Jae-sung wasn't just taking credit for her work. He was stealing from the company they had built. The second betrayal came through a misdirected email, a message from his assistant confirming a Maldives villa booking for Mr. Kim and Ms. Cho, along with instructions to ensure Mrs. Kim remains unaware of the arrangement. Hyejin Cho, the social media influencer whose career had mysteriously accelerated after she began appearing at NextGen events. 23 years old. Famous for her beauty routine videos and lifestyle posts showcasing luxury products. Minji didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she deepened her investigation, expanding it from financial records to personal communications, travel schedules, phone records. She discovered the affair had been ongoing for nearly a year. She found evidence of other women before Hyejin. She uncovered payments to tabloid journalists to suppress stories, bribes to hotel staff to maintain discretion. And through it all, she continued to refine her algorithm, continued to lead her team, continued to be the brilliant mind behind NextGen's success. She filed patents under the company name, carefully ensuring her contributions were documented in internal records but never seeking public credit. 7 years into their marriage, at the company's annual gala, Jae-sung announced a revolutionary new AI platform that would transform the industry once again. The technology was Minji's, a breakthrough she'd achieved after months of intensive work. She sat in the audience, applauding politely as her husband described her innovation as if it had sprung fully formed from his mind. That night, he didn't come home. The next morning, instead of confronting him, Minji called her grandmother, now 92 and living in the family's ancestral village outside Seoul. He has taken everything from me, Halmoni, she said, her voice steady despite the pain. My work, my dignity, my future. Her grandmother's response was measured, calm, the voice of generations of Korean women who had endured and prevailed. What can be taken can be reclaimed, she said. "The question is not what he has stolen, but what you have preserved." The answer came to Minji with perfect clarity. She had preserved the truth. For the next 6 months, Minji executed her plan with methodical precision. She secured copies of every document, every communication, every piece of code she had ever written for NextGen. She documented the timeline of innovations, matching them to Jae-sung's public claims. She compiled evidence of the financial fraud, the misappropriation of investor funds, the systematic deception that had become the foundation of his business empire. Most importantly, she retrieved the contract they had signed on their first wedding anniversary, a document Jae-sung had dismissed as sentimental nonsense. Minji had drafted it as a renewal of vows that included language about their business partnership. In his arrogance, his certainty that legal documents from his wife were meaningless, Jae-sung had signed without reading the clause that assigned intellectual property rights for her algorithm to Minji personally, not to the company. When she finally had everything in place, she didn't confront him. She filed for divorce. The lawsuit blindsided Jae-sung. He had assumed Minji would endure anything to maintain her position, her lifestyle, her connection to the Kim family name. The idea that she would choose dignity over security had never occurred to him. His response was swift and brutal. He froze her access to their accounts. He had her keycards to the NextGen building deactivated. He instructed the household staff to deny her entry to their home, forcing her to move in with her elderly parents in their modest apartment. He expected her to break, to beg, to negotiate. When she did none of these things, his attacks escalated. In divorce filings, he accused her of corporate espionage, of attempting to steal proprietary technology, of mental instability that made her a danger to the company. He claimed she had married him for his family connections and had contributed nothing of value to NextGen's success. Most cruelly, he suggested that she had deliberately terminated her pregnancy because a child would interfere with her obsessive work habits. The Korean press, long enamored with Jae-sung's carefully crafted image as a self-made tech genius, reported his accusations as fact. Overnight, Minji became a villain in the public narrative. The cold, calculating woman who had tried to destroy a national business icon. Old friends stopped calling. Research colleagues who had respected her brilliant mind now questioned her ethics, her stability, her very character. Her parents received anonymous threats. Her father's university received pressure to force his retirement. Through it all, Minji remained silent. She did not give interviews. She did not respond to accusations. She did not break down in public. She waited. In Korean court proceedings, patience is not merely a virtue. It is a strategy. The system rewards methodical presentation of evidence, careful adherence to procedure, respect for judicial authority. Minji understood this. Jae-sung, accustomed to bending rules and buying outcomes, did not. For 3 days in that Seoul courtroom, Jae-sung's legal team presented their case. They brought in NextGen executives to testify that Minji's contributions had been minimal and overvalued. They presented household staff who claimed she was cold, distant, obsessed with work to the exclusion of proper wifely duties. They showed carefully edited emails suggesting she had attempted to claim credit for innovations that were not hers. Judge Kim, a woman in her 60s known for her impartiality and attention to detail, watched the proceedings with an impassive expression. She occasionally glanced at Minji, perhaps wondering why the defendant offered so little resistance to the character assassination unfolding before her. Minji's attorney, a young woman named Soo-yoon who had been the only lawyer willing to take her case against the powerful Kim family, seemed increasingly desperate. Each time she leaned over to whisper strategy suggestions, Minji simply shook her head and continued making her precise notes. By the third afternoon, the outcome seemed inevitable. The gallery was filled with journalists, ready to report on Jae-sung's victory, on the humiliation of the wife who had dared to challenge him. Hyejin sat in the front row, no longer hiding her relationship, her face a mask of practiced sympathy that couldn't quite conceal her triumph. As Jae-sung's lead attorney prepared to make his closing statement, Judge Kim held up her hand. "Before we conclude," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery, "I have one question." The courtroom fell silent. Minji's pen paused above her notepad. "Mr. Kim," the judge continued, looking directly at Jae-sung, Could you explain the significance of the contract signed on April 18th, 7 years ago? The document appears to be some kind of anniversary agreement between you and Ms. Park. The question seemed inconsequential, a minor point of clarification before the inevitable ruling. Jae-sung smiled confidently. A sentimental gesture, Your Honor. My wife, Ms. Park, was always one for marking occasions with formalities. I signed it to make her happy. It had no business significance. Judge Kim nodded, then turned to Min-ji. Ms. Park, is this your understanding of the document as well? The gallery leaned forward. For 3 days, they had heard Min-ji's voice only when directly addressed by the court, and then only in the briefest possible responses. Even her own attorney seemed surprised by the question. Min-ji closed her notebook. She placed her pen beside it with deliberate precision. She looked not at the judge, but directly at Jae-sung as she finally broke her silence. No, Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. That document is a legally binding agreement regarding intellectual property rights to the core algorithm upon which NextGen Technologies was built. It clearly states that while the company may utilize the technology, the fundamental patents and rights remain with the original creator, me. The courtroom erupted. Jae-sung's attorneys scrambled through their documents. Jae-sung himself froze, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as memory surfaced. That's absurd, he finally sputtered. I would never sign such an agreement. You didn't read it, Min-ji stated simply. You never read anything I prepared. You assumed it was meaningless because it came from me. Judge Kim's interest was piqued. Do you have this document, Ms. Park? Yes, Your Honor, Min-ji replied, nodding to her attorney, who produced a sealed envelope. And I have much more. For the next 2 hours, Min-ji methodically presented evidence that transformed the proceedings. With calm precision, she demonstrated through documented code repositories that she had personally written every line of the algorithm that formed the foundation of NextGen's success. She showed emails, meeting notes, and development logs proving her role as the primary innovator behind every major breakthrough the company had achieved. She revealed financial records documenting systematic fraud, investor funds diverted to Jae-sung's personal accounts, shell companies established to hide assets, tax evasion schemes that spanned multiple countries. Most devastatingly, she played audio recordings of Jae-sung himself, captured in their home office, explicitly acknowledging that Min-ji was the true genius behind NextGen, while boasting to a friend about how he had built his public image on her anonymous labor. She doesn't care about recognition, his voice echoed through the stunned courtroom. That's the beauty of it. She solves the impossible problems, I take the impossible credit, and everyone gets what they want. With each piece of evidence, the narrative of the case inverted. The predator became the prey. The victim became the accuser. The silent, submissive wife revealed herself as the architect not just of technological innovation but of meticulous justice. Through it all, Min-ji's voice never rose, never broke with emotion. She presented her case with the same methodical precision with which she had designed algorithms, each component building logically to an inescapable conclusion. Jae-sung's composed facade crumbled. He interrupted, objected, finally shouted accusations of manipulation and deceit. Each outburst only strengthened the contrast between his volatility and Min-ji's steady calm. When she finally concluded her presentation, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Kim removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose as she processed the weight of evidence before her. Ms. Park, she said finally, you had all this evidence from the beginning of these proceedings. Why did you wait until now to present it? Min-ji looked directly at the judge, and for the first time, emotion surfaced in her voice. Not anger, not triumph, but a profound sadness. In our culture, Your Honor, we are taught that a wife's duty is to protect her husband's dignity, even at the cost of her own. I needed to be certain that there was no possibility of redemption, no chance that Jae-sung would acknowledge the truth voluntarily. I needed to give him every opportunity to choose honor over deception. She turned to look at her ex-husband, who sat ashen-faced between his attorneys. And I needed the world to witness who he truly is, not through my accusations, but through his own actions and words. Judge Kim nodded slowly, understanding the cultural complexities that had shaped Min-ji's strategy. She replaced her glasses and addressed the court. In light of this extraordinary evidence, these proceedings will be suspended while the court reviews all materials presented today. Additionally, I am referring the financial documentation to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal investigation. She looked directly at Jae-sung. Mr. Kim, I strongly advise you not to leave the country or attempt to transfer any assets while this matter is under review. The gavel struck with finality, and the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors, desperate to file updates on the stunning reversal. Jae-sung's attorneys huddled around him in emergency consultation. Hyejin slipped quietly from the gallery, already distancing herself from the impending scandal. Min-ji gathered her notebook and pen with the same deliberate calm she had maintained throughout. As she rose to leave, Jae-sung lunged toward her, his face contorted with rage. "You planned this from the beginning," he hissed, barely restrained by his attorneys. "You trapped me." Min-ji regarded him quietly for a moment. "No, Jae-sung, you trapped yourself. I simply built a door and waited for you to walk through it." As she left the courtroom, surrounded by a protective circle of her attorney and family members, reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her face. She did not respond, did not react, did not alter her measured pace. Her silence was no longer submission, it was power. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Judge Kim's ruling was comprehensive and unequivocal. The intellectual property rights to the core algorithm were legally Min-ji's under the anniversary contract that Jae-sung had carelessly signed. Next-gen technologies had been built on technology to which the company had usage rights but not ownership. Moreover, the financial fraud had been so extensive, so systematic, that the judge ordered a complete restructuring of the company leadership. Jae-sung was removed as CEO, barred from any management role, and required to return millions in misappropriated funds. Most significantly, the 51% controlling interest in the company was awarded to Min-ji as compensation for both the appropriation of her intellectual property and the personal damages sustained during the marriage. The Korean business world reeled from the decision. The stock price tumbled, then stabilized, then gradually began to rise as investors realized that the true innovator behind next-gen success would now be at the helm. Jae-sung did not accept defeat gracefully. He appealed, he threatened, he attempted to mobilize his family's connections to overturn the ruling. But the evidence Min-ji had presented was irrefutable, and the Kim family, recognizing the extent of Jae-sung's fraud, distanced themselves from the scandal. When criminal charges were filed by the prosecutor's office, Jae-sung finally understood the magnitude of his fall. The empire he had built on stolen ideas and stolen money was crumbling beneath him. Former allies abandoned him. Business partners denied knowledge of his activities. Friends stopped taking his calls. 1 year after the courtroom revelation, Min-ji stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Signal Seoul, addressing the annual Women in Technology conference. The audience was filled with young female engineers, programmers, and entrepreneurs, women who had followed the divorce case with intense interest, who had found in Min-ji's story not just vindication but inspiration. "They ask me why I stayed silent for so long," she began, her voice steady and confident in a way it had never been during her marriage. "Why I endured the theft of my work, the betrayal of my trust, the systematic erasure of my contributions. They wonder if it was cultural conditioning, fear, or lack of confidence that kept me from speaking out sooner." She paused, looking out over the sea of attentive faces. "The answer is both simpler and more complex. In our tradition, there is a concept called nunchi, the art of sensing what others need, what they feel, what they intend. It requires patience, observation, and strategic timing. It is not weakness, it is wisdom." Min-ji stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the audience. "I could have confronted my husband the first time he took credit for my work. I could have exposed his fraud when I discovered the financial irregularities. I could have revealed his betrayals at any point during our marriage. But confrontation without preparation is merely emotional release. It is not justice." The room was silent, every person leaning forward to catch her words. "So I waited. I documented. I built an irrefutable case. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I understood that in a world biased against women, particularly women confronting powerful men. Only overwhelming evidence would suffice. Only perfect preparation would prevent dismissal. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. And while I waited, I continued to create. I refined the algorithm. I expanded its applications. I built something of lasting value that will help millions of people access education, healthcare, and opportunity regardless of their circumstances. That work, or not revenge, not vindication, remains my greatest achievement. Minji returned to the podium, her voice growing stronger. Today, NextGen Technologies has been reborn as Horizon Innovation. We have doubled our research staff, with a particular focus on recruiting female engineers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Our profits have increased by 30%, and our ethical compliance is now the industry standard. She looked toward the back of the room, where her parents sat with quiet pride, their sacrifices for her education finally bearing fruit beyond any expectation. The foundation we are launching today will provide scholarships for young women in STEM fields, with particular emphasis on those who, like my grandmother, come from rural villages where educational opportunities have traditionally been limited. Because brilliance is not confined to privileged spaces, and innovation should never be concentrated in the hands of those who merely claim credit rather than create value. As applause thundered through the room, Minji felt a profound sense of completion. The anger that had sustained her through years of silent documentation, the pain that had accompanied each betrayal, these had been transformed into something constructive, something lasting. That evening, as the gala wound down, she found herself on the hotel's observation deck, looking out over the Seoul skyline. The city glittered below her, a constellation of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of potentials waiting to be realized. Was it worth it? Asked a voice behind her. She turned to find Judge Kim, now retired, holding a cup of tea. The waiting, the judge clarified. The years of silence. The strategic patience while he took from you. Minji considered the question carefully, giving it the full weight it deserved. Not for the outcome, she said finally. Not for the company or the vindication or even the justice. Those things matter, but they're external. Then for what? The older woman asked. For the person I became through the process, Minji replied. I entered my marriage as someone who believed value came from recognition, that my worth as an innovator, as a woman, needed external validation. I emerge now understanding that true value is inherent, immutable, and independent of others' acknowledgement. She turned back to the cityscape, her expression reflective. In that courtroom, when you asked the question I had waited years to hear, I wasn't just reclaiming my intellectual property or my financial security. I was reclaiming my voice, not by shouting, but by speaking truth with such clarity that it could not be ignored. Judge Kim nodded, understanding the profound lesson embedded in Minji's journey. Our mothers and grandmothers had few options beyond strategic silence, the judge observed. You have transformed silence from a tool of survival into an instrument of justice. That legacy may prove more valuable than any algorithm. As Minji made her way home that night to the modest but comfortable apartment she shared with her parents, a deliberate choice despite her new wealth, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The anger that had fueled her methodical documentation, her careful planning, had burned away, leaving clarity in its place. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Jae-sung had been formally indicted on 37 counts of fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of investor funds. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 15 years in prison. His lawyer had released a statement claiming persecution and promising a vigorous defense. Minji closed the notification without emotion. Jae-sung's fate was no longer her concern. Her focus had shifted entirely to rebuilding not just a company, but an ecosystem where innovation was properly credited, where contribution was valued over confidence, where substance prevailed over style. 3 years after the courtroom revelation, Horizon Innovation had become Korea's most valuable tech company, with offices in 20 countries and a corporate culture renowned for ethical leadership and inclusive innovation. Minji had established herself as a quiet but profound force in global technology, her rare public appearances drawing crowds of aspiring engineers who saw in her story a new definition of success. The algorithm that had started everything had evolved into an AI education platform that was transforming access to learning in developing nations around the world. Minji had insisted that the technology be made available at minimal cost to schools in rural and underserved communities, fulfilling the vision she had originally shared with Jae-sung in those early, hopeful days of their partnership. On a crisp autumn morning, Minji visited her grandmother's grave in the family's ancestral village. She knelt before the simple stone marker, placing chrysanthemums and offering incense according to tradition. "You were right, Halmoni," she said softly. "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that breaks. I bent almost to the ground under the weight of his betrayal, but I did not break. And now I stand taller than before." The wind rustled through nearby rice fields, carrying the scent of harvest and renewal. Minji closed her eyes, feeling the connection to generations of Korean women who had endured, preserved, and ultimately prevailed through strategic patience and unwavering dignity. What her grandmother could not have foreseen was how Minji would transform traditional wisdom for a new era, how she would demonstrate that silence need not be submission, that patience need not be passivity, that strength could manifest not through dominance but through methodical, meticulous justice. As she rose to leave, Minji noticed a group of schoolgirls watching her from the path. They wore the uniform of the local middle school, the same school that now had a state-of-the-art computer lab funded by her foundation. One girl stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "Ms. Park," she said, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness. "We studied your algorithm in our coding class. Our teacher says you changed everything." Minji smiled, kneeling to meet the girl at eye level. "The algorithm is just mathematics," she said gently. "The change comes from how we choose to use it, from the problems we choose to solve, from the values that guide our innovations." "Is it true," another girl asked, "that you waited 3 days in court without speaking, and then changed everything with one answer?" Minji considered the simplification of her story, how it had become almost mythologized among young women. The reality had been far more complex: years of documentation, of strategic planning, of building an irrefutable case while continuing to create value despite her pain. But myths had their purpose too. Sometimes the essence of truth mattered more than its details. "What I waited for," she told the girls, "was the right moment to speak truth so clearly that it could not be denied or dismissed. Sometimes our greatest power lies not in how loudly we shout, but in how precisely we whisper." As the girls absorbed this, Minji saw in their expressions the next generation of innovators, young women who would face their own battles but who now had a different model of strength to draw upon. "Remember," she said, rising to her full height, "your value does not come from others' recognition. It exists independently, inherently, in the quality of your work and the integrity of your choices. No one can take that from you unless you surrender it." The girls bowed again, watching with solemn admiration as Minji walked away down the village path. She moved with the measured pace of someone who understood that true power was never about rushing, never about dominating, never about claiming space that belonged to others. It was about creating something of such undeniable value that the world had no choice but to make space for it, and for the quiet, brilliant mind behind it. Minji Park had been silenced, erased, betrayed, and discounted. She had been written out of her own creation story, relegated to a footnote in the narrative of a man who built his empire on her genius. But she had never been powerless. Even in her deepest silence, she had been gathering strength, documenting truth, preparing for the moment when a single question would bring an entire false narrative crashing down. And in that moment, when Judge Kim asked about a seemingly inconsequential anniversary contract, Minji did more than reclaim her intellectual property. She redefined power itself. Not as dominance but as patience. Not as volume but as precision. Not as taking but as creating. The Korean CEO ex-wife stayed quiet in divorce court until the judge asked one unexpected question. And in answering it, she changed everything. If her story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of patient strength. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, redemption, and transformation. What would you have done in Minji's position? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Remember, sometimes your greatest strength lies in being underestimated. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should fear the most, not because they seek to harm, but because they see everything, remember everything, and know exactly when to speak the truth that changes everything.